Alright! Pull up your socks, roll up your sleeves. It's time to get active with RadioActive 90.4 MHz. Get active!
You are listening to RadioActive CR 90.4 MHz, Bangalore's first ever community radio station. My name is Abhay Rangan. I'm the founder of Society for Animal Rights and Veganism. Welcome to today's episode of the Liberation Now show. It is an incredible honor to have Aman Duggal as our host today. Aman is the founder and CEO of Alpharaj, which is an unbiased, independent and evidence-based organization devoted to spreading scientific knowledge and critical thinking in the fitness industry. He's an internationally published scientific author, a scholarship holder at the prestigious SBS Academy, and a fitness professional who is widely regarded as one of the brightest minds in the field of nutritional science. He's also a passionate advocate for animal liberation movement and studies animal rights philosophy extensively.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of the Logical Vegan Podcast. In today's episode, we are going to talk about vegan nutrition, and more specifically, we are going to break down some of the most common misconceptions people have with regards to vegan nutrition. If you're someone who's considered trying a vegan diet but had a family member or a friend discourage you from doing so, or if you're someone who has some reservations about vegan nutrition, perhaps based on what you've heard or read in the newspaper, then this episode is for you. I'm going to try and jam-pack a lot of information in this podcast, and I'm going to try my best to address some of the most common concerns and questions you may have with regards to a vegan diet. So without further ado, let's begin. The first thing I'd like to talk about is this idea which a lot of people have, especially the ones who are new to veganism. A lot of people think that veganism is a diet or eating vegan is a nutritional strategy to become healthy. And I want to say right off the bat that that is not what veganism is about. Veganism is simply an ethical stance against unnecessary animal harm and suffering. It's not a diet or a diet fad as it's often confused to be. As a vegan, I consume a plant-based diet not because I think it is inherently superior or more healthy than a non-vegan diet. I follow a plant-based diet simply because I do not wish to cause any unnecessary harm through my food choices. Having said that, I also realize that a lot of people do follow a plant-based diet because they feel that doing so will benefit their health or their exercise performance. Or they've probably read on the internet about the beneficial effects of a vegan diet. And yes, to a large degree, if done right, a vegan diet can be very healthy and can be a big improvement from the typical eating habits most of us follow on a day-to-day basis. But for those of you who are new to veganism, I want you to understand that veganism is simply an ethical movement. The health benefits which people experience on a plant-based diet are fantastic, but those same benefits can also be achieved on a well-planned non-vegan diet. So while the health benefits are certainly a bonus, that is not what drives most of us to be vegan. I will discuss in detail the health argument of veganism in a future episode because I do feel that sometimes vegans let their biases come in the way and tend to exaggerate the health benefits of a plant-based diet. And the same can also be said for some non-vegans who are absolutely convinced that there is no way a vegan diet can be healthful, or they feel that a vegan diet cannot be used to sustain high-performance sport or exercise activity. So whether you're a vegan or a non-vegetarian, I would encourage you to keep your biases aside and listen to this show with an open mind. As always, questions, debate, and argumentation are most welcome. So if you disagree with anything I say on this podcast, feel free to get in touch with me. And I'll be more than happy to address your questions in a future episode. With that said, let's begin by addressing some common misconceptions most of us have about vegan nutrition. Probably the first question I get asked when someone finds out I'm vegan is, how do you manage to nourish yourself on a vegan diet? And I'm sure a lot of vegans listening to the show can relate to this. Since a young age, most of us have been conditioned to believe that meat, dairy, and eggs are essential for the growth and development of a strong and healthy body. Especially in India, cow's milk is a staple in most homes, and most of us just cannot imagine giving up milk and other dairy products without compromising on our health. We have learned that these foods are rich in nutrients like protein, calcium, and iron. And when we realize that these foods aren't present in a vegan diet, we immediately worry about how we are going to meet our daily nutrition requirements. We even read about some of these concerns in the newspaper, on the internet, and we also hear them from some self-proclaimed gurus who claim to be experts in nutrition. So I understand this notion, I understand these concerns, and I understand why most people feel this way about vegan diets. In fact, I used to be one of those people who thought that there was absolutely no way the human body could survive, let alone thrive, on a vegan diet. But then I decided to take a step back, and I thought about this idea from a logical perspective. And I realized that this idea that certain foods are essential or irreplaceable just doesn't seem to make sense. And the reason this idea doesn't make sense is simply because the human body doesn't really care about any specific foods. The human body simply cares about nutrients. And fortunately for us, in today's world, we can easily acquire these nutrients from a variety of different sources, like fortified foods and supplements. So if you think about it, we don't have to rely on any specific food sources to meet our nutrition requirements. So, instead of closing our minds to these possibilities and dismissing a vegan diet as unhealthy or impractical, let's ask ourselves, what is so special about a glass of milk or a few eggs a day? Which nutrients are found in these foods which aren't present in plant foods? And if there are certain nutrients which are found only in animal products, is it possible to get them from other sources? And these are some of the questions we'll try to answer as the show progresses. So we just spoke about a common nutrition concern most of us have when transitioning to a plant-based diet. Most of us feel that vegan food is deficient in many important nutrients. So let's try to answer the question, how deficient is vegan food? And notice how I framed this question. I am asking, how deficient is vegan food, and not how deficient is a vegan diet. The most common criticism of a vegan diet is that it is deficient in certain nutrients. The problem with the statement is the assumption that supplements are not part of a vegan diet. If we can supplement with a certain nutrient, which vegan foods cannot provide us, then how can we say that a vegan diet is deficient in that specific nutrient? Take a moment and think about this. I'd like to share a quote here by Philosophy Lines. Why should we judge a diet by how effective it would be without supplements when we do have access to supplements? But let's assume, for the sake of argument, that someone wants to judge the nutrient composition of a diet without the inclusion of supplements. Is vegan food really as deficient as most of us think it is? To answer this question, I'm going to refer to Brian Rigby's book, The Multivitamin Lie. In this book, Brian shows that a well-planned vegan diet requires only about 1400 calories to reach the recommended daily allowance for each nutrient. And since most of us will be consuming a lot more than just 1400 calories a day, we can easily meet the recommended daily allowance through just food alone. There are, however, a couple of exceptions, and they are vitamin B12 and vitamin D. As far as vitamin D is concerned, I would encourage both vegans and non-vegans to supplement with it since it is rarely found in food. And if you're not getting enough direct sun exposure, it is best to take a D supplement. Also, if you're vegan, I would also recommend consuming a vitamin B12 supplement, unless of course you're consuming foods which are sufficiently fortified with B12. Most people are surprised when they find out that iron is not limited in the vegan diet. While it is well established that plant-based iron is not as well absorbed as the heme iron found in meat, many foods that vegans eat in greater amounts, such as grains, pseudograins, and green vegetables, these foods are fairly high in iron. Even nutrients like zinc and calcium, which people believe are difficult to get from a vegan diet, can also be easily acquired from just food. Now, if you want to learn more about the exact foods which were selected to devise this diet, you can check out the show notes where I'll be linking Brian's book as well as my article in Alan Aragon's research review where I discuss this in more detail. Okay, now let's talk about the biggest question most people, especially young men, have about vegan diets. And that is, where do vegans get their protein? And again, just like a few things we've already discussed, this concern largely stems from a few basic misconceptions people have about protein. And the first of those happens to be this concept of labeling protein sources as complete and incomplete, or first class and second class protein sources. So let's break this down. The term complete protein is actually something of a misnomer because almost every source of dietary protein contains all the essential amino acids. Briefly, for those of you who don't know, protein is made up of amino acids, and it is these amino acids which the body requires. Some foods just happen to be lower in certain amino acids than others. And we can always work around this by combining different foods to make complete protein sources. A common example of this in Indian cuisine is rajma chawal, that is having kidney beans and rice together to make a complete protein source. Rice is low in the amino acid lysine but high in methionine, while kidney beans are low in methionine and high in lysine. But when we combine the two of them together, we get a complete protein source. Having said this, you don't have to combine foods at each meal to make a complete protein. If the meal you eat is low in a particular amino acid, then the body can get it through the amino acid pool, which is basically a certain amount of amino acids which are always floating freely in your bloodstream. So again, to quickly summarize, you don't need to have a complete protein at each meal. Just make sure that at the end of the day, you get enough protein from a variety of different sources. Another thing I'd like to touch on, and this is again something I often hear people say, is that plant protein is of low quality or that it is low in bioavailability. And some people take this idea one step further and say that you shouldn't even count protein which comes from plant sources. To demonstrate just how absurd this sounds, let's consider some common plant foods which a vegan may consume as part of his or her diet. A typical Indian vegan breakfast may include a cup of oatmeal with some soy or almond milk and a fistful of almonds. That is 17 grams of protein. Lunch could be 2 whole wheat chapatis with a healthy serving of cooked beans and a cup of cooked dal. Depending on the serving size, that again is anywhere between 28 and 38 grams of protein. For snack, a vegan may consume 2 slices of brown bread with 2 tablespoons of peanut butter. That is around 16 grams of protein. And finally, dinner can be half a cup of tofu, a cup of brown rice, and some cooked vegetables. That's 24 grams of protein. So if we add all this up, all of these supposed low quality protein sources amount to a total of 95 grams of protein. That's a lot of protein. So even if all these protein sources don't have the highest bioavailability, it doesn't make sense to simply discount all this protein. The body will absorb a percentage of this protein, and given the fact that the body has a very efficient digestive system, it will most certainly absorb a large chunk of this protein. So again, if you think about this from a logical perspective, the idea that we shouldn't count protein from plant sources just doesn't make sense. It's like saying if it is 100%, it is good, and anything less is bad. It's a very black and white way of looking at things. Speaking of bioavailability, the PDCAA score, or the protein digestibility corrected amino acid score, is currently considered by many organizations as the gold standard for measuring protein quality. Most plant foods by themselves may not have a high score, but as we've already discussed, by combining foods like rice and peas or grains and legumes, we can get a full score on the scale. If you're interested in learning more about the PDCAA score and the different methods of measuring protein quality, I'll be sharing a few links in the show notes, so make sure you check them out. I also realized that some people have higher protein requirements, particularly those of you who are looking to lose weight and build muscle or engage in any form of sport or exercise. And that is where we can consider supplementing with something like plant-based protein powder. These can be really useful for vegans and even non-vegans who for some reason or another struggle to meet their protein requirements. I'm sure a lot of you must have heard of whey protein powder. Similarly, we also have plant-based protein powder. Soy protein is perhaps the most commonly recognized and the most popular plant-based protein supplement. I'm sure most of you are aware of soy protein concentrate and soy protein isolate, but a couple of protein supplements which you may not have heard of are pea, rice, and hemp protein. Pea and rice protein in particular are not just high quality protein sources, but they've also done really well in the research. In the one study which compared pea protein with whey protein, pea actually managed to outperform whey for increasing muscle thickness. Don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying that pea is better than whey just based on this one study. But I think it is fair to say that from the evidence at hand, pea, soy, hemp, and rice protein powders are all high quality protein sources which can be used as alternatives to whey protein and other animal protein sources. So I guess some of you listening to the show will probably be wondering whether these protein supplements are available in India. And yes, they are available in India. And plant-based protein powders are not only becoming popular amongst vegans, but also amongst non-vegans. One of the reasons why I feel these proteins are becoming popular is because a lot of people struggle to digest lactose, which is usually found in whey and casein protein. So even if you're not vegan and you suffer from lactose intolerance, plant protein powders like pea and rice can be really helpful as they are really easy for most people to digest. I'd also like to give a quick shout out here to Unived and Amit Mehta. Unived is India's first and only plant-based supplement company, and they have a fantastic product called Lean, which is a pea protein isolate supplement. So if you're interested in plant-based protein powder and other plant-based supplements, make sure you check out unived.in. That is UNIVED.in. There is one last thing I want to talk about on this episode before signing off, and that is soy protein, or rather the fear most of us have developed of consuming soy products. Now, this fear is more commonly seen in men because they think soy has testosterone decreasing or feminizing properties. So I want to spend a few minutes and discuss this. The idea that soy can increase estrogen and decrease testosterone production sounds really convincing in theory because soy has certain compounds known as phytoestrogens. But let's see what the research has to say on this topic. And we actually have some really good research on the subject. In 2007, a study done by Douglas Kalman and his team found that soy protein supplementation did not have any negative effects on testosterone production. In fact, if anything, all the groups in the study showed an increase in testosterone and a decrease in estrogen. Similarly, a review by Hamilton and Reeves again showed no negative effects of soy protein on testosterone production. So keep in mind, just like any other food, when consumed in moderation, soy protein does not seem to have any adverse effects on hormone production. Another common criticism of soy is that it has certain compounds which affect the digestion and absorption of protein and other nutrients. While this is true to a certain extent, it is unfair to target soy specifically because this problem exists in many other foods. In fact, by selectively quoting research and cherry-picking studies, you can probably make an argument of this nature against almost every single food on the market. Also, something to keep in mind is that the concentration of most of these compounds, which hamper digestion, is greatly reduced in commercially prepared soy products. For example, in something like soy protein isolate, these compounds are almost non-existent. So again, the bottom line is that soy isn't going to kill you or make you a girl, so you don't have to worry about it. I know I've touched on this topic very briefly, so make sure you check out the show notes where I'll be linking to some excellent articles which expand on the subject. So to quickly summarize today's episode, we discussed vegan nutrition and broke down some of the most common misconceptions most people have about vegan diets. We learned that a vegan diet isn't as deficient as most people think it is. We covered the idea of complete and incomplete protein sources, protein quality, and the different plant-based protein supplements which are available on the market. And finally, we touched on soy and learned that just like any other food, soy products can be consumed in moderation without any negative side effects. And like I said at the start of this episode, if you have any suggestions, criticisms, or questions which you'd like me to address in future episodes, please feel free to get in touch with me. My email address is aman@alfraj.com. That is aman@alpharaj.com. With that said, I will now sign off. This was the second episode of the Logical Vegan podcast, and I look forward to seeing all of you in the next episode.
You are listening to RadioActive 90.4 MHz. Get active.